Okay, thank you very much, Rosie. The first thing I want to say is, no, I'm just kidding, actually, the microphone's working. I thought it was amusing anyway. Look, I'm very pleased to be here. I hope this works. Do excuse me if I cough a little bit. As Rosie said, we're absolutely covered in red dust in Sydney. I can't believe it. Never seen anything like it. The book I'm going to talk about is this book, Charles Kingsford Smith. And as you can see, let me get that into camera, it is a big, thick book. It's about 2 inches across. I think it's 240,000 words. And don't be intimidated, however. And I'm not so much encouraging you to buy my book, be it for you. What I want to talk about is partly writing, partly Australian history. When I was your age, year 9, year 10, I was not much of a writer and I was certainly not much of a history student. But one day, I was in Rex Ward's class in year 10, in the history class, and I was doing what I usually did in history class, which is I was counting the bricks from left to right, and I was counting the bricks from the top to the bottom, and I was multiplying the number to work out how many bricks were in that wall, and then I doubled it and then did on the walls on the side, because I found that it helped to pass the time in what was otherwise dull history lessons. And then I began to listen. He started talking about the Eureka Stockade, which is an extraordinary story from Australian history, and I didn't so much focus on it as the history part. I just thought it was a stunning story, and it is. And the more I've read and the more I've written, the more I've realised how amazing Australia's history is and what a wonderful exercise it is to get into it. In terms of this book, I never would have thought that I could have written a book that big, and maybe I shouldn't have made it quite as big as I did. But if I can say what turned me into a writer, it is that beginning was getting enthused by Australian history, starting to write a little bit about history, and being a reader. I think if you want to be a writer, being a reader is the first step. And broadly, the more you read, the more you understand about the way the world works, and the more you develop an ability to write. If I can give you one word of advice about your writing, it is this: the art of writing is the art of rewriting. So whether you're writing an essay, whether you're writing a short story, whatever you're writing, the more you do, the more you draft it and redraft it, the better it gets. So usually you will finish, let's say, an essay that you've got to get in, a history essay that you have to get in by next Monday. You may well finish it tonight. And at 10 o'clock tonight, you'll finish the essay and you'll think that's done. And you'll read it over and you'll think, yes, it all makes sense. Why it all makes sense is you're looking at it with hot eyes. When you write something and you understand exactly what you mean to write, when you read it back, it all works. It's all fantastic. Can I encourage you to read it the following day, or better still 2 days later or 3 days later, when you've forgotten what your exact meaning is, and you're looking at it with cold eyes. And as soon as you look at what you've written with cold eyes, you'll see all the mistakes that you've made, phrases that you didn't need to say, a different way of saying it, a better way of expressing it. And the more you work on a piece of work, a body of writing, the better it becomes. But ideally, what I'm trying for as a writer, where did I get all that information from? I went to his diaries, I went to the letters, I went to contemporary accounts that had been written at the time to get the information. And what I'm attempting as a writer is not to give you some dry, dull, dusty text. If I simply said to you, on December 17, 1903, the Wright brothers got off the ground and flew for the first time, that is, for me, a little bit ho-hum, who cares? What I'm trying to do is to get the information so that instead of you being in your Forbes and Cootamundra and Dubbo and Mudgee classrooms, Caringbah, and reading about something that happened 90 years ago and looking with a telescope of dim, distant, dusty figures of a long time ago that got off the ground, who cares? What I'm trying to do is to get you to be in the cockpit with them as it takes off. So to do that, mostly I try to use the present tense. I try to get as much information as I can to make it real, to make you feel like you're there. Do it in the present tense. The wind was blowing in, the wind's blowing in his face, and the scarf's billowing behind him, and the straps of his helmet are going like this, so that hopefully you feel like you're there. But the first real book that I wrote was a book on my best friend, Nick Farr-Jones, who was the Wallaby World Cup winning captain in 1991. And if you think of who your best friend is and how you would go writing his or her story, how much do you actually know about your best friend? How would you go about writing the story of their life? Now, when I started, I had no idea how to do that. What I got is my subject, which was Nick, and I got a tape recorder, and I recorded him for about 20 hours. So I get all the information that I can out of him, 20 hours, and then I actually probably should have done it myself, but I got to transcribe it to go through and to give me the document, which was 20 hours, was perhaps 40,000 words of Nick giving me the story of his life. I then have my base information of my subject, of their account of their life. So I'm looking for the seminal moments in their life. So if I'm doing a footballer, the seminal moments will be the first time they ever pulled on a rugby boot, the first time they ever scored a try, what their first coach said to them, what their first coach thought about them, how they felt about it, then when they went to school, then when they first became captain of the first 15 or whatever, first time they're picked to play for the New South Wales team, the first time they're picked to play for Australia, the first time they're dropped. All of our lives are made up of seminal moments. The moment in our life where we're going this way and it goes that way, and then it goes that way and it goes that way. So as a writer, to encapsulate somebody's life, I'm looking for particularly all those moments where it deviates, because that will be what will hold the interest of the reader. Now, so many thoughts, so little time. Here's one other. I used to work with somebody who, at the Sydney Morning Herald, who I would say to this journo, what are you writing today? And she would say, oh, I'm doing a really boring story on skateboarding or netballing or whatever. To which my answer was, listen to me. I didn't say that to her, but I say it to you. Listen, there is no excuse for ever doing boring writing. It doesn't matter what your subject is. When you are writing, your job is to find the points of interest. Find a way to make it interesting. And it doesn't matter if you're doing a history essay or an English essay, or you're doing it for the HSC, or you're doing an exam, or you're writing a letter to your mum. It doesn't matter what you're writing. If you're writing it and your name goes on the top of it, then you have to find a way to make it interesting to the reader. But if your opening approach is, gee, this is dull, gee, this is boring, geez, I'm sick of this, geez, I wish I wasn't doing this, geez, I wish I was outside, you're going to end up writing horrible stuff. And the moment that he first gets picked for the Wallabies, that goes there. And so as I'm going on, I've got my body of research, but I'm seeing all these wonderful anecdotes and wonderful stories. Then I put them in chronological order, and then you start to work out what I'm missing. So I go back to Nick, and I get more questions and more questions until over time I feel like I've got an encapsulation of his life. And what I have done since that time is really focused on writing Australian history books. I have done, most notably, I suppose, Nancy Wake. It was a book that, an extraordinary story about an extraordinary woman. And for me, working on the book on Nancy Wake, writing the book on Tobruk and Kokoda, writing this book, particularly writing this book, I loved writing this book, because one of the other Russian writers, whose name escapes me, he said, I've had a wonderful day. He said, I've had a wonderful day's writing. In the morning, I rode with princes through the forest. In the afternoon, I dined with princesses. Along those lines, the idea being, as a writer, if you are, whatever you're writing about, your mind, you're there with them. So ideally, when I was writing this book, I spent the morning flying with the Red Baron over the fields of France, and in the afternoons I was flying with Kingsford Smith and Lindbergh across the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic.